This week, I cover a car that I've been wanting to get behind the wheel of for a long time, and I cover the end of another GM brand. This is a 2008 Pontiac G8 GT. I know bigger channels have covered it before, but Pontiac deserved so much better. Were they essentially rebadged Chevys 9 times out of 10? Yeah, but even at their most rebadged, they were still the fun option in GM's lineup. A victim of circumstance, Pontiac was finally making a serious effort to step forward as GM's performance brand, but it came at absolutely the worst time. Years of Little Tykes interiors, making swings at expensive niche vehicles and options, and just the pure bloat of their corporate lineup with far too much overlap meant that the 2008 recession hit GM especially hard. And of course, the company would declare Chapter 11 bankruptcy on July 10th, 2009. Part of the bloat cut meant that 4 out of their 12 brands would face the axe, and as much as a bright future Pontiac had, its performance image in the face of GM trying to convince the US government that they were working on hybrid and electric vehicles for the environment, and the fact that suddenly Buick had appeared as a massive cash cow with the Chinese market meant that Pontiac was done. On October 31st, 2010, Pontiac was officially dead. 84 years of being the fun option in GM's lineup. And while much of them were rebadges, the brand had a dedicated following and was making a serious effort to separate themselves from the rest of the lineup. This would be led by the rebirth of the GTO in 2004 and the push by GM North America's chairman Bob Lutz to sell Holden Commodores in America. After reading a car and driver review that praised Australia's Holden Commodore SS, Bob was determined that American buyers deserved that car, and the performance that the Aussies were proudly waving down under. Now, the GTO technically wasn't the first attempt at this, as the Commodore's German cousin, the Opel Omega, was sold as the Cadillac Catera from 1997-2001 with little fanfare. Unlike the GTO and the future G8, the Catera was meant to be a BMW fighter in the luxury side, and was sold with little fanfare after bowing out to make room for Cadillac's even more serious German fighter, the CTS. No, Bob saw the performance potential for the Commodore as a Pontiac instead, and the 2-door variant, known as the Monero, would be captively imported to the States in 2004 to replace the Firebird as the GTO. Now, I won't lie, I'm a stan for the 5th generation GTO. But boomers are a fickle folk, and while the GTO had the performance chops, its subdued sleeper styling meant that the nostalgia-driven buyers were staying away in favor for the upcoming nostalgia-thumping S197 Ford Mustang, Dodge Charger, and Chrysler 300. Every year sold worse than the last, and the GTO was axed following the 2006 model year. But Bob Lutz was undeterred. The Commodore was getting a massive redesign in 2007, and it too would come to America as a Pontiac. What you see here would be Pontiac's swan song flagship, the G8. Filling the full-size gap by the front-wheel drive Bonneville, and also serving as the performance replacement for the GTO, the Pontiac G8 was to usher in a new era of American muscle by the way of Australia. Sitting on GM's new flagship performance platform, the Zeta platform, the G8 is roughly the same size as the Bonneville I reviewed back in December of 2022. However, unlike the Bonneville's large front-wheel drive grandpa car underpinnings, the G8 is rear-wheel drive and V8 powered, like any good American or Australian car. The base G8 came standard with the high-feature V6 and 5-speed automatic, but the second and third levels are where the G8 is at. At the top of the heap was the GXP, which featured aggressive styling, the Corvette's LS3 V8, an available 6-speed manual, and a Nürburgring tuned suspension. In the middle is what this car is, the GT. Under the hood is the 6-liter L76 V8, produced 361 horsepower and 385 foot-pounds of torque. The 6.0 is hooked up to GM's trusty 6L80 6-speed automatic, and that sends power to an independent rear end that features a gear ratio of 292:1. Other features the GT gets over the base include quad tailpipes, clear taillight lessons, automatic dual-zone climate control, a larger center console screen, and 11-speaker blow-punk audio system, and started in 2009, rear cup holders. Ooh. On the outside, nothing really differentiates it over its Commodore cousin, other than the Pontiac's famous split grille and the Pontiac badges. Inside is similar, but the big difference, of course, is being the fact that the G8 is a left-hand drive car over the Australian Commodore being right-hand drive. And other than the badge and the quad tailpipes, the biggest indicator of this being a GT over the base is, of course, the hood with the fake hood scoops, like a proper muscle car. Like the later CTS-V and ATS performance that I've already covered on this channel, the G8 GT is an absolute joy on the street. The 6-liter snarls at every chance it gets, and the independent rear hooks up so damn well when you break the rear tires loose. With these new rear-wheel drive cars, GM really let their brands care about how these cars drove. This 361 horsepower isn't a fantastic amount for this big heavy car, and the suspension doesn't really lean like the GM boats of old. This is indeed a budget sports sedan, and I will sing the praises of how well these cars drive. With the traction control off, tires are instantly melted away with ease. Steering is heavy but precise on these backcountry roads, and it had no problem cruising well above the recommended speed limits. Like the ATS performance, I instantly fell in love with this car behind the wheel. The G8 was sold as a budget alternative to the BMW 5 Series and Infiniti G line at the time, and it greatly undercut both at price while offering a performance that rivaled those more expensive cars. But where you see that difference in price is most definitely on the inside. While the design is fine, GM is known for good ergonomics and offering comfortable seats with plenty of amenities. But the G8 suffers what hampers a lot of aughts GM cars suffer from: absolute horrific materials and build quality. Which sucks. It absolutely sucks. I love this car so much, but it pains me to see this fun daily driver fall absolutely apart on the inside. The headliner is coming loose, which, while yes, this is a 15-year-old car, it's definitely the newest vehicle I've seen the headliner fail on. The plastic shield over the gauge cluster, it's fogged up, and the owner says that it's getting progressively worse over his ownership, like a previous owner or dealer using a too aggressive of cleaner at some point. Another thing he says is an issue is the steering wheel is sticky, like the plastic/rubber is melting, so he has this AutoZone wheel cover on to keep his hands from getting sticky while driving. And of course, it's assembled with all the plastics you find on a little Tykes cozy roadster. And I hate that, because I like the chunky styling in here. It's kind of hard for me to describe, but unlike a period Ford or Chrysler product that used a similar chunky styling at the time, a big guy like me can kind of comfortably sit in a period GM and just able to reach everything at ease. I love how the handbrake is integrated with the center console, and I love how there's a little grab handle on the other side to provide symmetry. Everything's easy to get to, and it does its best to be as non-intrusive as possible to allow you to be comfortable and undistracted on long drives. But it's this Mega Bloks assembly that led GM off the cliff in the late aughts. This particular 2008 Pontiac G8 GT was purchased by its owner a couple years ago, and is used as his trusty daily driver. It does have a couple of mild mods, such as the boiler exhaust and larger Camaro SS wheels and tires. While the wheels add to the look, they do rub just slightly in corners. That was something that came with the car when he purchased it from a dealer a couple years back, by the way. He absolutely loves this car, and it has had some gremlins in the couple of years of ownership. He's on radiator number 3 since buying it, and it's been through 4 taillight bulbs. The TPMS system has a common fault where it's producing the incorrect numbers in the computer, thus the light on the dash. Has been through a seatbelt and airbag recall, the common ignition switch and key fob failure that plagued these cars, and he had a delivery driver back into him one day, which explains the cracked grille. And of course the aforementioned interior issues. But he loves this car, and he's quietly working on fixing the interior issues, and he looks forward to commuting every day thanks to the joy that this car brings him. Like I mentioned before, as much as the G8 had going for it, it launched at the absolute worst time possible, at the height of the 2008 recession and GM's ongoing troubles and bankruptcy. Of course, in the middle of a tanking economy, big full-size sports sedans were of course on the bottom of most shoppers' lists. Just 38,159 G8s were sold over 2 years, a massive sales disappointment for what was a hyped-up rebirth of Pontiac's performance. Pontiac even had plans on bringing in the 2 other body styles of the VE Holden Commodore, a Ute in a wagon. The Ute was announced, the G8 ST, at the 2008 New York International Auto Show, but it would be cancelled at the start of the next year as the troubles brewed, just weeks away from production. And the wagon, long teased and dubbed the G8 Sport Wagon, would never be announced officially as it was further in development. And by July of 2009, GM was officially in bankruptcy, and Pontiac itself would be on the chopping block in the newly laid out plans of new GM. Despite all of this, Bob Lutz pushed on, intending the VE Commodore to be sold instead in America as the reborn Caprice. However, the name would only return for a police-only model known as the Caprice PPV, using the long wheelbase cousin of the Commodore, the Holden Statesman and Caprice, as the starting point. It wouldn't be in 2014 when the next generation of the Commodore, the VF, would that a Chevrolet would follow, being the low-volume SS, which is aimed at being a homologation special to compete in NASCAR's Cup division. And before you yell at me, don't let the low sales people fool you, that model was never meant to be a volume seller. It was purely an homologation special. As a bit of going away for the G8, and probably more because they had a lot of spare noses to use, Holden would use the Pontiac G8 fascia in a 2009 special edition Commodore known as the SS V-Series edition. Unlike the G8, the SS V-Series edition was available on all three body styles, and the production was limited to 1,500. The Pontiac G8 was a fantastic car despite its interior flaws. The driving dynamics and some of all its fun bits outweigh its milk jug plastic interior, and I would love to get one myself someday. These are such fun cars, and it's a shame that GM America wasn't on the same wavelength as GM Australia until it was too late. There's a reason that the Holden Commodore is a legendary nameplate down under, and the Pontiac G8 was just a little taste of what Aussies were getting. It's such a shame that the G8 debuted when it did, because if it was allowed to debut just a few years later, there's a good chance Pontiac would have easily followed Dodge's muscle car revolution of the 2010s. Or maybe not. Holden's sales would plummet in the 2010s, despite how good those cars were. And by 2017, its long-standing Elizabeth, South Australia plant would be shuttered for good. And by 2021, Holden itself would be retired in favor of GM importing low-volume Camaros, Corvettes, and Silverados. A sad end for one of the Australian automotive industry's two pillars. But the Pontiac G8 deserved so much more than its poor sales. Such a fantastic driving experience, just sold at the absolute wrong time for such a product. 2008 Pontiac G8 GT. You deserve so much better, and let your legend grow on. Have a good day, everyone. Thank you once again for watching another episode of Wookie Drives. This week's episode comes courtesy of Jacob of Mooresville, North Carolina. Thank you so much, Jacob, for letting me drive your fantastic daily driver for this show. If you have a car or truck you'd like to see on the show and have it be in the Charlotte or Mooresville, North Carolina area, email me your submission to Wookie Drives at wookiedrives@gmail.com. That's right, submit your car to wookiedrives@gmail.com. That is wookiedrives@gmail.com. Don't forget to give the video a like, share with all your Pontiac and Holden Commodore friends, comment with some feedback. Any sort of feedback really helps these small channels grow. And finally, don't forget to subscribe and hit that bell for notifications for more Wookie Drives like these. Thank you so much for watching, and have a good day.
Love for car has never been more real. Introducing the first ever Pontiac G8 GT, the most powerful car under 30 grand.